Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. It is your favorite warlock, practicing necromancer. And today I want to kind of focus on what it takes to be a devout within the path of a necromantic practitioner. You get underneath YouTube or Google, you have various perspectives of what necromancy is. From D&D type games, role-playing games such as Dungeons and Dragons, to video games like Diablo, or say for an example, I don't know. Let's go with Forgotten Realms. Forgotten Realms. Wiki. W-I-K-I. Wiki. You go underneath books such as Greek and Roman necromancy. A lot of times when we get into necromancy, we don't really take the time to delve into the historical path workings of it, the anthropologic aspects, anthropology. We can go into thanatology. We can go into folklore, mythology, even. And you get beings that are associated with death, such as Thanos or Thanatos in Greek, the very impersonification of death itself. Anubis being the jackal-headed entity in Egyptian mythology. The one that stands on the platform in front of a big, giant portal. But people don't really delve into these other type of practices, such as necrotic surgery, or which is something I've recently started studying as a necromancer, especially from a psionic perspective. It was once told to me, to be a great practitioner, you have to have knowledge of both destruction and healing. Hell, even the book of Remy, the complete history of demonolatry, basically, the book of demonolatry by Remy, Nicholas Remy. He put forth in chapter 1 that there are 3 types of powders. One that kills, it's black, it's a black powder that kills, a white powder that heals, and most importantly, a amber colored that makes somebody sick. So you kind of get that perspective of both healing and destruction, death, magic. You go into let's go with the Faustbach, which is now known primarily as the book of Dr. Faust, Frankenstein's monster, the creator. And we see where blood sorcery is associated with vampiric practices, Da'ath magic and stuff like that about 500, 600 years ago. But a lot of people, they don't really delve into history and how things like necromancy was tied into divination and ritual and ceremonial type practices. What does it take to gain that insight and that particular alchemical practice of study? It's dedication, it's commitment, it's a lifestyle that one chooses to follow. to apply to one's life. For an example, when I first heard about necromancy, I thought it was cool because it was about being that bad guy to the church. It was something where you played the adversary, because at the time I was a practicing Satanist. And it was kind of, to me, it was more about the conflict. It was more about the opposing force, you know, and I didn't really take it seriously at the time. And I wish I did, because I would be further along in necromantic practice than I am today. But back then, it was like, oh, it was a little over a decade ago. So, I mean, you're talking 2011, 2012. So it's been like 11 years. But I've been aware of necromantic practices going back 25, 30 years, from the Necromancon by Simon, to Donald Tyson's perspective of different species. Even if you get into the Goetic practices, you have beings like Murmur, Bifron, and Seer, who specialize in necromantic and spiritual practices. Grimoires such as, let's go with Francis Barrett, the Magus, where he talks about necromancy in his practices, using angels and the biblical perspective of it. The grimoire of Pope Honorius, for example, or the Black Dragon, the Grand Grimoire, talks about how you can commune with spirits and bring them forth. But if you're thinking about what it takes, such as reanimation, or say, for an example, bringing a spirit back to life, rejuvenation and conjuration practices, of necromancy, that's as far as people actually get into this type of practice. And it's interesting because several grimoires of the past 1,000 years, going back to the Renaissance and the Dark Ages even, have put forth practices and ideas and idealism of what it takes to be a practitioner. Take Eliphas Levi's story. The best one there was in the Book of High Magic, or the Book of was it the Book of Doctrine and High Witchcraft? I think it was. I have the book out there on the shelf. It's been so long since I've delved into it, I've forgotten the name of it, but it was like High something. It was like, fuck. Now I can't remember what it is, and that's going to bug the hell out of me throughout this video. But it's the Doctrine of High Magic, basically. And he literally tells the full story of how Eliphas Levi went from practicing Hermetics to going to try to join a secret society of Black Magi in London. And it kind of tells him the story about the bags of herbs and the ceremonial symbols that were used, such as the power, the circle of empowerment. Some groups such as Wiccans and pagans refer to it as the circle of protection. And in this perspective, you're looking at it as that. And then he kind of tells you about how he's got the circle of protection, and the triangle of evocation involved. This is something that E.A. Coetting actually spoke on. And because he's very big on evocations as being a primary source of spiritual communion. Now, what's ironic here is that after this one encounter with a spirit that caused Eliphas Levi's arm to go numb and limp for like 3 days after being touched by the spirit, he ran back to Hermetics and never practiced black magic again. Now, the Catholic Church actually considers necromancy as the most darkest magic out there, and it's one of 7 primary forbidden practices. And it's ironic because Most people don't even get into it. They don't even get into things like the Munich manuscripts, you know. But 6 years ago, I delved into an area of study of necromancy that I wasn't prepared for. I kind of It kind of clicked for me when I joined this organization, and I'm not going to say which one, but it was one of the things that I started delving into was the path of the lick. I started getting into things that fascinated me about it, which was the not just the beings of death and what necromancy is, but how closely it resembles various different modern day practices, such as the defibrillator and the medical practices of resuscitation. Now, if you go back 100 years or even 200 years in London, the biggest practice there was ice water and submerging somebody through suffocation of water. Today, they use this in torture techniques where they place a rag over your face and pour water to try to suffocate you. It's a form of torture. But back then, in psychiatric wings, their practice was to submerge you in ice water. I'm talking Antarctic type water. Okay. And the ideal of this was to kill off the affected brain cells that they thought would bring somebody back into what they called um, the proper thought form, if you will. So if you are schizophrenic, for an example, or you suffer from delusions of grandeur, they would these schizophrenic breaks, they would lock you away for life. But those who came out of it in this practice would actually be submerged in this water, and it would kill off that portion of the brain that was affected or decayed. Now that was kind of cool to discover, but it went further than that. When I started delving into thanatology, learning about death and seeing how it was associated with modern day practices of hospice or that of the soothsayer, the CNA work of modern day practices. If you look at the herbs and the medications that are implemented to help keep somebody comfortable during their dying process, look at the clergy, you know, look at counselors and how they listen to the death. And one of the practices is I discovered this was about 300 years worth of practice and ended in the 19th century, is where somebody would go in, and the Last Supper, if you will, that you see in the Bible, if you take that that perspective, you literally will get in there, and after the person died, that person is designated to take. It's called a sin eater, and the practice is that you eat the Last Supper of the deceased, and that person's sin is transferred to you. It's very, very interesting to read and to see. It's not just things like Kakashi, who became the immortal, the deathless one. When you get into the terminology of a dead body, for example, in Greek, modern day Greek, you hear the term necro, which means dead, the practice of death, basically. In Roman necromancy, it's called nigromancy, the art of black magic. Negro meaning black, and mancy meaning practice. Okay. So when you go back into ancient Greek, you see the terminology of Nikia. Now, Nikia was more of the more natural association with necromantic practices because of the communion with the spirits. It didn't just deal with spirituality. It didn't just deal with healing and herbalism, but it dealt with various different aspects such as alchemy, potions, elixirs, and things that would be considered today as poisonous plants. Things like hemlock, white Oriolander, ricin type things, the devil's trumpet, and I actually studied this quite extensively when I first got into it, and I have like over 10 pages in one of my grimoires just on poisonous plants and trees. Some of which you would be surprised is actually at your school, your children's school, surrounding the playgrounds. Even if you go into a city and to a city park, these plants are actually there, and it's kind of you're trying to keep your children safe, and yet you got poisonous plants there. That would be like letting your kid play in poison oak or poison ivy, but just more deadly if they devour it. And it's like, okay. So after a couple of years of intense study and practice, I started learning about branding the flesh. I started learning about death magic. What does it take to turn your body into something that is unnatural? Things like psionics or spiritual warfare became something real. You realize that these forces are out there attacking you. And depending on which side of the line you're on, you're either practicing that of the white light magics or you're going into the dark arts, such as Satanism, Pedo Mayambi, Brujeria, um, say, for example, voodoo, or that of European hexa, the strega, the stragoi, the eshi or the aji, the witch doctor, modern day brua or bruo, the santero, the miramberos, the warlock, you know, all these type of practitioners, even Vlad the Impaler or the vampiric practices. You're utilizing blood sorcery, animal sacrificing, just like the Hebrews and the Jewish did, just like the Catholics did, just like the mainstream Christians used to do before they decided, oh, this is unholy, it's unnatural, but yet they believe everything in the Bible, and you can go into the Old Testament and you see it in the book of Leviticus, you see it in the book of all five books of Moses. I forget the author's name, but it was Valerie something, and she actually wrote a book that was based off the tabernacle. It was run by the Aaronite brother of Aaron, the brother of Moses, known as Aaron. And it was interesting because when you get into the priesthood aspects, you see how they dealt with death. One of the tests that was put in front of me was to do an essay on Egyptian necromancy, and that took me a long time to go through. It wasn't until I was put on the path of the Shem priesthood that things really kicked off for me, and it led me in all over the world. Now, what's interesting is I started looking at the combat aspects. I started looking at the nobility of it. I started looking at the different names, such as the lick or the glick, the cadaver, the corpse. Every known religion speaks to this. The way of spiritual possessions, agents of death, such as the vampire being turned into a vampire. European tradition is full of this alone, just on that alone, not just the black dog, but the Bucharest. But it was interesting to see how a horse or a cat wouldn't even walk over a grave of somebody who had come back as a vampire. You go into Haitian voodoo, such as Haiti, or say, for example, the Congo region of Africa, such as Malawi or Ethiopia, Nigeria, you know, area, and you see the zombie, and the practices of herbalism. And I mean, herbalism has played a huge part in sorcery for hundreds of thousands of years, long before Christianity and the JCI were even a conception or a thought form in its mama's womb. Goes all the way back to the 6th century and beyond. And I'm talking BC, by the way, not AD, not BCE. I'm talking BC, as in old school. This goes back before Zoroastrianism, which came before the Christian era. So when we get into learning about the lick, we start going through the gods. That's the most common thing that we start with. So you start learning about the gods, you start looking about the practices, the tales, the stories, the folklore, the mythology behind them. You look at things like Homer's Odyssey, you start Paradise Lost. You start going into the old scrolls in texts, getting down into these demigods and getting down into these heroes' journeys and their struggles. You start getting into things like the Zohar, the Talmud, the Jewish Haggadah. You get into the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then you get into the Book of Tobit, and you start seeing those struggles between good and evil. You start, seeing a theme. So by the time you get into the actual practices, you start discovering these names. Now, when you get into the path of a necromancer and you start developing that lifestyle, and you're learning, you've developed a good understanding of things like the divination basin, the basin of the scrying basin, or what we use as a scrying bowl today. You utilize glass, like crystals, for an example, a quartz crystal or black onyx, the cornelia, even. These things you start learning about in their properties, how they can be assigned to help you with your spiritual journey, how you can use them for protection. Even more so, you get into the herbs and you find out, okay, what herb can deal with cholesterol, what type of herb can deal with say, for an example, warding off of cancers. Plants, even such as garlic or mushrooms, for example. Certain things could help you with your visions, things that you can break down into alchemical practices and put into elixirs or potions, even. Griscris bags, things that were associated with death, and hexcraft and curses. But more so, you're looking at things that really have been forgotten over time. And a lot of times when you see this, you think, wow, all of this has been forgotten. Modern society has forced you to believe that this is the way things were and has been. And then you look at the account of hours, days, months, years that it has taken you to write, say, for an example, 7 essays. It's taken me 6, 7 years just to do all that research. It takes time. It takes dedication and commitment to come up to that. But you also got to remember that there are things that spiritualists have done, such as fasting. Okay. One of the greatest fasts out there that you'll see going as far back as the 11th century is called the Black Fast. And this was considered to be a extreme version of fasting. This particular fast was done where you're barely eating anything. You're eating unleavened bread, honey, things that would nourish your body over a month period. Plenty of wine or water, things that would fill your belly. Basically, the point of this was to purge your system of the, how should I say this, the unnatural qualities of what's put into your foods, today, such as pesticides and chemicals. But back then, it was the unnatural things that had built up. It's the things that built up in your system that was causing disease and decay. And if you think about that in itself, I mean, just look at how much asthma is around. Look at how much cancer and diseases are around today. More so, look at how they're creating medications that you're taking on a daily basis because they're telling you, oh, you have this or that. Well, you look at people who have gotten away from all this BS. My son's mother, for an example, she separated from her family over a lot of BS. And most recently, I found out that she hasn't even been taking her antidepressants, which explains why she's been happy and why she's been more alert and focused and everything. But she's also going through that withdrawal aspect. Now, personally, I wouldn't have quit, like that, just done. I mean, as a minister, I would have recommended at least talking with your doctor first. But you know, doctors do make medical personnel do make the worst patients after all. But even then, I mean, you look at poisons that were used back in the Renaissance and the Dark Ages. You look at Europe, which was filled with assassinations. You look at the quantity of certain things, like certain. Let's go with let's take ricin for an example. Certain amount, like say 1 to 3, would make you ill. These little beads, if you will. But if you do 8 to 12, it would be fatal. You know, if you utilize Oriolander or hemlock, you know, some things are tasteless and odorless, so you can put it within any food or drink. Which is why it takes hours and if not days for somebody to even begin to show symptoms of being poisoned. And you get into this stuff and it's like, wow. You start doing fastings to purge yourself of all these harmful buildups, which also resets your natural clock and your digestive system at certain intervals. And one of the things that was put into the Bible aspect was called the Daniel fast. And this was done over a 2 to 3 week period. It's not as extreme as the black fast of the Catholics. But you basically shy away from things of meats and you eat nothing but those things such as fruits and vegetables for like 2 3 weeks. Things that were grown of the ground and not of the animals. And then you go into another form, which is called the Keta fast. And the Keta fast, basically, unlike the Daniel fast, you see the Daniel fast is more spiritual, and it was more about getting, because it was more about the ascension process, whereas the black fast was more about spiritualism. It was about becoming closer to God. And when you get into, by the time you get into the Keta fast, this was more of a scientific approach to fasting, and it's more modern day. And it was very interesting to read and to see this because at certain intervals, you're seeing how you get hunger feeling, you start feeling weak, you get headaches, you end up getting tired, and all of a sudden it's like, bam, like like say, for example, 8 to 12 hours into the fast, it's like, wow, I've got an energy surge here. And you continue on past that, and it's more about resetting that clock. So all that corruption and that damage that's take place that has caused you to not be able to digest certain foods or impurities such as the prevention of gallbladder stones or kidney stones, which can be done with lemon juice, blood purifier, which is also done by lemon juice, an immune booster with mint, you know, garlic cloves, for example, is a great way for preventing certain cancers, and then you get into berries, and they help the organs in certain ways, in the digestive system in itself. You get into things like turmeric, and you get into how it helps, and ground ginger as well, which helps to lower cholesterol over time. And it's like, wow. So, all right, let's delve into how they actually create these medications, these synthetic medications that they give you and tell you that this is the only way you can do this. Hmm. Then how the fuck did they do this, for hundreds of thousands of years before your so-called synthetic magic? Hmm. Wow. But then, like I said, you start putting that lifestyle together. You start out by fasting once a year. You start out putting certain things into place, such as a dedicated system of study and practice. You start learning about the definitions and spirits and the different rituals. You start applying it to your life. I mean, I'm talking. I don't know how many hours, how many years that you're doing this and learning. It's only been 6, 7, like I said, 6, 7 years. It took me 6 years, 4 of which was dedicated practicing of necromancy. The beginning of this year, I delved on a 2-year, 3-month spiritual journey that I've been doing daily. I'm talking daily meditation. I'm talking daily worship and devout worship to the spirits that I work with. I'm talking rituals. I'm talking working out with weights, doing cardio. A year ago, for an example, I spent years trying to get my shoulders back into shape after shoulder injuries. Couldn't do certain things like the flies with the dumbbells. Couldn't do it. Too much pain. Now I can do them like they're nothing. I started learning about the lick. What does it mean to be a practicing lick? Russian and German, the two most common names, lick and glick. These are the ordinary licks, the ordinary practitioners who have moved on beyond necromancy. Because you have the necromancer, which is more like a dabbler, the lick, which is more of a lifestyle. And then you have the difference between a lick and an arch lick. Now, the arch lick is something completely different because my studies and my practices into this area, because I've been really focusing on this. Now, a lot of this is tied into things like I said at the beginning, video games and role playing, but there are instances within folklore and mythology that you see how somebody is able to transform themselves into a lick, into a archlick even, through these rites and rituals of transfiguration and transmortification processes. But I found it very interesting because of the fact that one of the regions that I've really been obsessed with lately isn't just working with Papa Gedi or that of Baron Samedi, Oya and the Orisha even, or like I said, Baroness Dambella in Voodoo, Baron Samedi, Voodoo, you know. But the biggest influence in my life specifically has come from Kakashi. The tales that surround him, how he ripped his soul out and placed it in a phylactery and hid it into various different, animals after putting it in a needle and hiding it on a specific island. You see this in the black hen, even, the black pellet in today's world. of grimoire traditions, and it's not just there. I mean, we see it in the Black Pellet, the Black, the Grand Grimoire, Grimoire Red Dragon, even. We see it in the Constitution of Pope Honorius and various other grimoires throughout the last 1,000 years. But you look at the tale of what he's described as, the imagery of it, that pale white skin, a kingdom of frozen wasteland, but with trees and a forest, a stag that is considered to be the fastest in the land, the brutality and the cruelty of it. But more so, you look at the knowledge that has been obtained. They couldn't kill him, which is why he was known as the Deathless One. He was associated with 3 different texts of stories by him, about him. And one of the ones that caught my attention was where a young king married a queen, became the king of a great empire, went up, found an old man withered, dying of thirst, basically, or what perceived to be dying of thirst, chained to a wall, and all he did was give him some water. And he became a young man, kidnapped the princess or the queen, took her to his humble abode, if you will. This king, this young king, according to just about all the texts of that region, says that he made a deal. He attempted several times and was let go. Kind of like a warning, if you will. Don't come back. But it was the queen who persuaded Kakashi. Let him go. Let him live. Basically sacrificing herself to be his prisoner. How that role literally turned 380 degrees. He was her prisoner, and now she is submitting to being his prisoner. Kind of like modern day marriage, if you think about it. Sorry, I had to throw that one in there. But furthermore, it shows where Baba Yaga, this crone, this withered old crone, plays into it, and some of the texts refer to her as the ruler of the 12th dimension, the most powerful witch there. She was considered to be a hexa, Haxa, hexa, and it was interesting to see where she looked at the king, this young king, and said, "If you can do this for an entire night and keep my flock safe, then I'll give you the fastest steed in the land." And she underhanded him at every turn, but it was his connection to the spirits, to the animals, that brought him victory over Baba Yaga. And in the end, he ended up having to chop Kakashi up, put him in boxes, and take him to the furthest most reaches of the earth because he couldn't be killed. So basically, he was dismembered. Kind of reminds you of the story of Ra and how he terminated Osiris and how Isis became associated with Anubis. Interesting how that story plays into that, isn't it? I mean, he was dismembered. He was poisoned by a black serpent. That venom killed him. And yet she went to Anubis, say, "Hey, how can I revive my lover, my partner, my husband?" Interesting how that plays into effect, isn't it? And she became associated with necromancy and Egyptian mythology, and how the balance of iniquity was something that was very, how should I say this? It was a necessity in that region because a lot of people feel guilt and guilty about the things they do. For an example, I went to my elders and I said, "You need to abide by the law. You need to promote me. Otherwise, you'll have a lawsuit against you for discrimination, both equal rights and those on certain other things." Okay. And I had a team lead and an ACM said, "No, you can't do it." And I said, "Really? Then you're in violation of this, this, and this of the labor laws." Basically, twisting that arm. And at that time, one of the higher ups, the upper management, such as the district manager and the regional manager, walked in and said, "He's not wrong." But here's the thing: when I threatened to get a lawyer, this individual brought me into the office and said, "This kind of hurts me personally because you didn't come to me and talk about this with me." I said, "This has been going on for months. I'm tired of the BS. I'm tired of the fucking attitude. And the fact that you're feeling disrespected, the fact that you're feeling that kind of guilt, that tells me that you know you were wrong." Okay. So iniquity plays into a huge part of what Osiris does. And the story of Ra killing Osiris and how Isis became associated with death and necromancy practices of reanimation of corpses and everything, such as putting the flesh back together, the weaver of the flesh, if you will. I thought that was kind of an interesting story because of how she felt that she needed to sacrifice a part of herself to grow. And if you actually take the note of why Anubis helped her, but also why Ra did what he did, it was a lesson. It was a hidden lesson in that story, saying that you have let things get to a point where there's no balance. There is no fucking balance, and you have to fight for it. You have to fight for your rights. So Osiris is the god that deals with iniquity, and he's the one that has the feather on one side of the modern day scale, if you will, that you see in the courtrooms. The depictions of the scale with the gold versus the feather. That's basically what that symbolizes, is iniquity of guilt. Okay. Unlike him, you have Anubis, who his story holds the human heart versus the gold on a scale. Very interesting. But then you have Hecate or Hecate, okay, in Greek, who was a Greek titaness. She was a titaness within the Titans who became associated with Zeus and was considered the goddess of the black dog, the Bugarest. She always was depicted with these black dogs around her. Justice, necromancy, witchcraft, and how the darkest arts were associated with her. Very, very interesting to see all this stuff. To go into the lessons of the Rada Loa of death, Baron Samedi, if you're talking Haitian Voodoo or that of African based voodoo. The lessons he puts forth is the necessity of death and why it's important to learn about it. That there is things after death that one can strive for and towards. Oya, the Orisha, known as the Orisha of death, of the dead, is a lot like hell, if you will, Helios, if you will, in Nordic traditions. These two particular beings rule over the land of the dead. When you look at things such as the rise of the king, if you will, within Lord of the Rings, when the king rises and he takes up that sword and he goes to the land of the dead to bring forth the spirits of the dead into the battle, you see the crown of the ruler of the dead. And he made a pact. He made a pact with this particular king. And the reason I bring this up is because of this. Okay? This is the reason why I bring it up. The archlick is known as one of nobility, to keep one's word. They've learned to go beyond decay and to stop it. They maintain their knowledge within a purity of sense. They're highly intelligent. They're dedicated both as a coven or as a solitary practitioner, where the world doesn't interest them, but they're more into the study and practice of death and death magics, about traversing other realms and all that stuff. It literally becomes about the study of death, plain and simple. And when you compare an archlick to a lick still is decaying. His memories are not pure. He or she begins to forget things over time because they haven't mastered their practice. And if you look at this, you see low necromancy compared to high necromantic practices. So, I mean, the journey into necromancy in itself is one that's going to take a lifetime, if not more. This is why most of these practices and stories that you see in these old folklore traditions, even in no matter what religious practice you're in, you're going to see where death is a part of life. It is the polar opposite of life. It is, you got the living and then you got the dead. It is the polar opposites. So if you're looking at the equal armed cross put forth by Constantinos in Nocturnal Witchcraft, for an example, you have light versus dark, good versus evil. Okay. And then you get the four soul types in the center. Now you can expand on this. And the more you grow, the more you mature within your tradition or practice, you're noticing that you're literally creating a spider web effect. And when you look back during reflective times, you're looking at, wow, I did all this. I did all this over this period of time. Over the last year, it's been almost 12 months since I began this journey, this spiritual journey. And I'm looking at I've been reflecting about this in the path of lichdom. I've been, the path of lichdom where you're working towards that lifestyle and beyond. But you're looking at the difference between a lick and an archlick, and it's like, wow, fuck. I can't believe how much I've studied, how many different religions and philosophies, theurgy even, that I've delved into. 7 different essays, 2 of which I combined. So in essence, 6 essays, not 7. And it's ironic because of the fact that there's so much knowledge out there that you don't know. It humbles you. Yeah, I was thinking about somebody that once said when they met these other masters, it was humbling because this person could feel how much otherworldly they are. And it made me think about what my clients and what my coworkers, what my son's mother has told me, what my mother has told me over the years. But more so, I look at what the enemy forces have called me, the combatants of the enemy, who have come to me and told me that I'm an archdemon, that I'm a antichrist, and I'm evil, and the like. My mother referred to me as a vampire because I was so pale, and growing up, and because I like being out at night rather than during the day. The fact that I love learning now, and I didn't love learning back then. I looked at, I started reflecting on the fact that even my own apprentice, looked at me. One of my apprentices looked at me and said, "Wow, you're good." Or that of, say, for example, it's because you're seeing it, you know, without being told. You just get to that point where it's like you just name off something. It's, whoa, wait, I didn't tell you anything. How did you know that? Which is why divination is something that is strongly associated with necromancy practices, especially that of mediumship. And as I told him, I said, I told a friend of mine, a coworker of mine, I said, spirits talk. They do. They talk. It's up to you to learn to listen. Because when they speak, you need to listen. You need to learn. Because spirits will teach you, they will guide you along your path. They'll even give you and bestow upon you titles of importance. They'll even help you get your life in order. You know, Working with, for an example, Belial. You know, when I was working with Belial, he taught me a lot. He taught me about being what it takes to be an alpha, a sigma male, if you will. But more so, he bestowed a title on me. You know, about 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago, one of my bosses had a heart attack and a triple bypass, and I said, "You know what? Fuck this." I said, "Fuck this." I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I don't give a shit about the cost. I don't care about the fucking cost. I want to know what it's like to be this at this level. I want to know what it's like. I want that experience. Next thing I know, most of the employees just got up and left. Just got up and left. I started being a closer. I started counting the tills. I started doing team lead and shift lead type practices. And then I became a dietary aide at a resident assisted living foundation. And it was interesting because I became literally fourth in command of the kitchen. So you're seeing how the spirits are opening the doors behind the scenes. So they are opening the scenes, just like Belial being the giver of titles of importance. You've got Paimon, who's the persuader of men's minds. Things that you do that, like Bolith, for an example, who can make you invisible, to certain activities that you do so people don't see what you're doing. It's like a cloak of invisibility, if you will. And so you're looking at all this unfolding. You ended up experiencing what it's like to be a father and a partner. It doesn't matter if the relationship suddenly just imploded and you ended up being single again. Yeah, hence why I made the joke, on my Facebook page yesterday. I said, when an old friend of yours that you no longer associate with and haven't associated with in over a year and a half, suddenly just shows up in your apartment complex and living with another friend of yours that back when you were a Satanist, and becomes his girlfriend, and she realizes you've been single for a year and tells you need another woman in your life, and it's like, hey, let me go grab my inverted cross. Be gone, type thing. So yeah, it's one of those things where you're seeing where things are unfolding, but then you sit there and you realize how much you've done in a year, from your practices to your lifestyle to your research and study, and then you look back reflecting and it's like, fuck, I've really pulled away from society. I have pulled that far back from society that it no longer interests me. People come to me talking about what's going on in the government, to what's going on in society, what's going on in other countries, and it's like, doesn't interest me. Have you seen this on the news? I don't watch TV. I don't care. I would rather be in a library, dedicating my life to research and study, and then applying it through alchemical practices to my own life so that I can master myself, my environment, bettering myself through apotheosis, through gnosis, because I want to better myself, not for society, not for a corporation. I don't give a two shits about the corporation. I'm doing this for me, me and me alone. My son's mother looked at me the other day and she says, "Why are you so good to me? No one else is, not even my own family." I looked, I looked right at a um, a worker yesterday and I said, "Why do you think they always come to me? I've always got money because I don't do anything with my money. I do everything myself. They're a part of my pack. I look out for my pack, me and mine alone." It is the same thing within a coven setting, a temple or a church setting. Why do you think these ministers and these clergies don't involve themselves in your drama, the world's drama? It's got nothing to do with it. It's about spiritualism. It's about bettering yourself. I had one minister. He was a Pentecostal minister. I looked right at him and I said, "Your issues are your own." And he said, "Exactly. Because it's your responsibility to deal with it." You see, people have become so laxed in today's society that nobody does their own research. Nobody does their own um, studies, their own practices. They're just accepting what's there. They get pissed off about it, which is called hypocrisy and duality, but yet they're not going to sit there and do anything about it. They're not going to step up to that plate. So when you get somebody who actually steps up to that plate and does the work, they become the adversary, the bad guy. They become the enemy. I've been the enemy my entire life. I'm okay with it. And as my cup says, no time for your bullshit. Fitting, isn't it? As I'm drinking peppermint tea from Tim Hortons. Love it. So, hey, Black Tower, welcome. And Kelly Jocelyn, welcome to the channel. So, anyways, I got to get going, but I got things to do. But I wanted to kind of come under here and kind of give you an idea of what it takes to traverse a path of a necromancer. What does it take to rise up that rank and to gain that insight, that knowledge? The level of practice and commitment and dedication it takes to get to that point where it's like, wow, I'm not part of the world anymore. How the hell did that happen? You know, because it does happen and it did. And all of a sudden it's like, what do I do now? So here you are a year into your spiritual journey and you're reflecting over everything. and you see how far you've come in 6 years, how far you've come in a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades. And you even got people from the past that you don't even know who the hell they are, and they're going, "I'm apologizing to you because I was associated with so and so," and it's like, who the fuck is this person? You must not have made an influence because I have no clue who you are. you know? So it's like, okay. So this stuff does happen, and you will realize there will come a time in your life when you have to sit there and make that choice. Do I want to remain an adept? Do I want to remain a dabbler? Or do I actually want to make this my life mission? Do I want to become that career student? Do I want to focus on bettering my own life, me and mine? That's when you realize you've become the practitioner. That is what your world has become a part of. Your entire everything you do is associated with necromancy. Life or death. You study the death practices. So yeah, keep those horns up. Keep those, sending that knowledge. Whatever you preach, always back it up with numerous sources, and always make yourself available to the public, because you answer to not only to the people, but also to the spirits that you work with. You're responsible for the things that you say and do. All right. With that said, have a good day. And until next time.